So I'm just super excited, honestly, like just to have Brett. It's been one of my goals for 2019 and 2020, just to have him here, and here he is online. So please, let's welcome Brett. God bless you, Brett. Thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Wow, thank you, Corey. That's very kind and generous introduction. And I want to thank Father Raymond for the invitation that was extended, Martina, obviously, and Isabel and the whole team that was doing all the organizing. It is a lot of work, and I certainly deeply appreciate all that you're doing. So just making sure a sound check, Martina, you're in my view. Just give me a thumbs up. You can hear me clearly. We're all good on that front. Excellent. Okay. Yes, it is an absolute honor to spend time with you today. I just am so committed to parish and diocesan leadership for the church. We really are caught up in the most important mission in the world. There is nothing that is happening in the world that is more important than what you're doing. Nothing compares to it. Nothing will outlast it. Nothing is more important. So let's get our caps on today for something very special. Whenever I've done presentations, there's always kind of two ways that you can go after leadership development. There is the two approaches, I guess you could say. And some reason now there we are. There they are. So you can have an approach that is sort of skimming the surface and covering broad territory, developing lots of content and conceptual ideas, or you can do a deep dive in one of those particular themes and really go after something very deeply, very profoundly. And so today is a former approach. We're going to do kind of skim the surface. We're not going to go too deep into any area, but we are going to cover a lot of ground. So by the end of it, there should actually be a lot of questions, I hope, that people will have after your small groups. And what I want to do is I want to begin by covering 5 fundamentals of leadership, 5 fundamental maximes. I would actually go so far as to call them laws of leadership. They are fundamental. They are so fundamental. It's almost like the laws of gravity. Like it or not, the law of gravity applies to everyone, right? And you can try to live outside of the law of gravity, and that's not going to turn out very well for you. So we call these leadership maximes the laws of leadership because these laws apply to every leader, regardless of industry or geography. These laws are relevant in good times and in bad times and in pandemic times. In fact, they apply most during pandemic times. You know, there's been a lot of talk around what does leadership look like during a pandemic. Leadership itself never changes. The environment in which you are exercising leadership changes, but the fundamentals of leadership actually never change because it's always the same thing. So whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or the pastor of a rural community in Quebec, these laws of leadership apply. They're always hold true. So there are several laws. I'm just going to touch on 5 of them as we begin today. The first is leadership is influence. It is not about authority. It is not about management. The second is that change is the permanent landscape of leadership. Third is that there is no such thing as servant leadership. That's usually a thought-provoking statement, which we'll get into. Fourth is everything rises and falls in leadership. And then the 5th one is a personal one. It's a law of leadership that applies to our hearts, which is so important. All of leadership should be lived from the heart. If it's not, it's deficient in certain ways, and we're going to explore that. So those are the 5 laws that we're going to cover. Let's get after the first one. First one is that leadership really is influence. It's not about authority. It's not about management. And one of the best quotations on leadership, and the reason why I say it's one of the best is because it's the most succinct. It says a lot in a small amount of words, is that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Dr. John C. Maxwell, who is a former pastor turned leadership guru, he says very simply, if you think you are leading and no one is following you, then you're only going for a walk. Now, you will not understand the nature of leadership until you really understand what following is all about. Far too many people, when we start this leadership journey, really trying to understand it, they begin with the question, well, what is leadership? And that seems like the right question, but I would suggest it's actually the wrong question. The right question is, why do people follow? And people follow basically for 3 reasons. The first reason that people follow, get caught up in something bigger than themselves. is that they want to follow out of fear, basically. Followers get along by going along. You could call this lip service loyalty. Leaders in this situation use coercion, frankly, to get people to do what they want them to do. And people do it for fear of what will happen if they don't. And this is not real followership, of course. But across the globe, there are many people who are forced to live this kind of followership. The second reason why people follow is for utility. This kind of dynamic is basically rooted in a transactional relationship between a leader and a follower. So people follow because of the perceived benefit for doing so. And the leader has something that the follower wants, and the follower has something that the leader wants, and then they sort of mutually transact over that relationship. Leaders that lead in a transactional setting will never see full discretionary effort or full personality blooming of their people, or their giftings really coming to the surface. They may have their back or their hands or their voice, even for up to 8 hours a day, but they never have their heart. And leadership is an issue of the heart. And because they don't have their heart, you will never see the power of full engagement. Again, this is not real followership, and therefore it's not a real expression of leadership. Now, the third kind of followership is different, not only in intensity, it is completely different in kind, completely different than the first two. And therefore, it introduces a new expression of leadership, one that I would call authentic leadership. It really is the only kind of leadership that is truly leadership. In this case, people follow not out of fear, and they don't follow because they perceive benefits in following. They follow because they want to. They are intellectually and emotionally convinced that the leader is the kind of person worth following. And this is not, mindless obedience. This isn't robotic servitude. This is influence, the highest form of leadership. And a lot of leaders in the corporate world, and sadly, a lot of leaders in the pastoral world, try to lead by leaning on their title. They lean on their positional authority. And these are really people that are not operating of leadership. You could call them, they're living a situation as propped up kings and queens, if you will. It's not authentic leadership. And they may experience some degree of power over people that authority has, but that's significantly different than power with people. And that distinction is very, very important. There is a big gap between having power over people and having power or influence with people. Consider the gospel, and you look at the life of Jesus. Beautiful scene unfolds in many of the synoptic gospels with Jesus approaching Matthew, the tax collector, Levi, and he looks at him with love, and he says two words, "Follow me." And Matthew leaves everything to follow him. That is influence from the Son of God. You look at another situation, St. Anthony of the Desert. There's a story told where when St. Anthony was in the desert, there was a young man that would go and visit him, and he would visit him once a week, and he would just spend time with him. But this young man, in visiting St. Anthony, would never ask him a question, wouldn't begin a conversation. He would just sit there. And even the great St. Anthony at one point kind of got a little, inquisitive, perhaps frustrated, like, why are you here and yet you don't ask a single question? And the young man said to him, "It is enough just to be with you." That's influence. That is power with people. One of the pointed examples out of the Gospel of Mark, it says that when Jesus had finished saying these things, people were astonished, for he spoke with authority, unlike the scribes. Again, that speaks to the difference between power over and power with. So a clear illustration with how important that is. Okay, we got to move on. Let's talk about change as the permanent landscape of leadership. Every organization operates three agendas simultaneously. There's the sustaining agenda, the improvement agenda, and the change agenda. So who owns the sustaining agenda? Well, of course, that's the individual contributors, the producers. That's in the parish context, that's individual staff and volunteers that keep the operation going on a daily basis. The improvement agenda is owned by the managers. Managers are those individuals that are tasked with making things better. context, uncommon, obviously, a manager and a producer. It's not uncommon to be an unpaid manager and producer. I get it, but the roles are to sustain the agenda and to improve the agenda. You know, managers are those who make improvements through enhanced efficiencies, or they introduce a new piece of IT or technology. They organize a new group to start something. But leaders own the change agenda. And if leaders do not own the change agenda and take full responsibility for it, no one will. If an organization, in our situation a parish or another Catholic institution, has no change agenda, it will become stuck in the status quo, or it will become an enterprise that is overmanaged and underled. Parishes in this state, or Catholic institutions in this state, will never embrace the transformational change that is necessary for renewal. Think of it this way: without any change, you will keep doing what you're always done, and you will get what you've always got. It's a simple, kind of pithy statement, but it's true. If you don't change what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you have right now. So consider, for example, if many of you are from the parish context, consider your parish from 5 years from today. What do you dream about for your parish? What do you see and what do you desire in terms of parishioner engagement or your impact on the community, evangelization efforts, renewal? And whatever you think about, think about where you are now. There's naturally going to be a gap. And what closes the gap is change, is progress, right? And so the mandate of every parish leadership team is the same. Every single mandate, or every single parish leadership team has the same mandate: to take the parish from where it is right now to where it needs to be. That's it. And in the gap is change, and leaders own that change agenda. Simply put, without change, there is no progress. And if there's no change between now and 5 years from now, chances are we'll be in the same place, because that's just the law of inertia. This is why leaders don't lie in bed at night dreaming about the way things are. They lie in bed at night dreaming about the way things could be and should be. And because we work for the church, must be for the kingdom of God. Okay, moving on. There is no such thing as servant leadership. And before I jump into this one, remember I told you we're on a speedboat, right? We're not descending to the depths. So we're covering a lot of ground really fast. And then you're going to have times to talk about it in a small group and maybe pose some questions afterwards. So there's no such thing as servant leadership. Either you are a servant or you're not leading, right? So this is not to diminish the servant aspect of leadership, not at all. It's actually to elevate it. It's actually to equate service with leadership. They're actually synonymous terms. Hacksaw Ridge has become one of my favorite movies, and it's based on the real life story of a man named Desmond Doss. And, there were 16 million soldiers fighting in World War II, but only 431 of them received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and Desmond Doss was one of them. And when President Truman presented him the medal, he said to him these words: "I'm proud of you, son. You really deserve this. And I want you to know that I consider it a greater honor presenting you this medal than becoming the president of the United States." Those are some pretty significant words spoken to this young man. So what did he do to deserve such an honor? So allow me a few minutes just to share a very abridged version of his inspiring story. So Desmond Doss entered the Army as a conscientious objector. He wanted to serve his country, but he didn't want to carry a gun, and he certainly didn't want to be involved in killing anyone. Now, he thought that his sort of pacifist stance would put him in the medic field, but it didn't. He was actually assigned to the rifle infantry. And throughout training, his company of men persecuted him, they beat him, they mocked him. And on the night before they were going into battle, one of his comrades came to him and said, "Doss, I hope that you do not make it out alive." Imagine going into battle with people beside you on your team saying, "I hope you don't make it out alive." There was one incident where some of his peers woke up in the middle of the night and sort of scullied over his until he was bleeding in the morning. And he actually got in trouble with his commanding officers the next morning because he had blood on his sheets. So horrible situation, but throughout training, he suffered this fate all the time. And when they went into battle at Hacksaw Ridge, and within minutes, they realized that they had been ambushed by an invisible enemy. They had climbed this, you see the image there, the picture on the screen, they climbed this 100-foot cliff to go into battle and realized that they were ambushed. And the commanding officers ordered everyone to retreat. So all the able-bodied men with guns began to retreat and descend down those ropes. And they left their wounded brothers and those who had already been killed on foreign territory. And Doss began to retreat as well, but at the top of the cliff, just before he was about to descend down, he actually felt the presence of God. Believe it or not, in that battle scene, he felt the presence of God. He was a Christian man, very devout in his faith. And at the top of the cliff, he prayed. He said, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm confused. Please help me. Please be clear. What do you want me to do? And at that moment, he heard a voice cry out, medic, Doss, help me. And that to him was a confirmation that God was inviting him to stay. And so this, while his able-bodied men with the guns were going down the ropes, he went back into battle without a gun to save his brothers. And that night, Desmond Doss saved 75 men. 75 men who were left for dead, 75 men who had families, and he saved them by himself. And because of his heroic actions, President Truman said, this is a greater honor to present this medal than becoming the president of the United States. There's no such thing as servant leadership. Either you are serving or you're not a leader. Moving on. The fourth one, everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership development is a multi-billion-dollar industry. In the United States alone, over $13 billion is invested every year. And these numbers are staggering, right? $13 billion. And that number only reflects the investment made in the corporate world. This does not speak to government leadership development, doesn't speak to academia, doesn't speak to the nonprofit world. Now, the irony with this is that most companies will never see a return on that investment. Why? Because the vast majority of the money that is spent on leadership development is targeted to what the corporate world calls high potentials. Those are younger staff with the greatest leadership potential. And these high potentials also happen to be the ones who are most sought after by corporate headhunters. And so long before a company sees a return on the investment in their younger high potential leaders, other companies steal them away. So the question is, why do organizations continue to make these huge financial investments, even if it doesn't pay off? Because everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership really matters. There's a wonderful book out there written by Jim Collins, who has some sympathies towards the Christian church and done some great things for different churches. It's called Good to Great. And in writing this book, he specifically set out with his research team, do not make this a leadership book. I don't want to talk about leadership. I want to talk about organizational health. And his research team one day came back to him and said, we can't ignore it. Leadership is so significant in the development of a healthy, productive, wonderful culture in an organization, you have to put it in. So we can try to eliminate leadership from the conversation, but you can't. Inevitably, it will always come back to leaders. The data is clear on this. Organizations that are well led significantly outperform organizations that are poorly led. And what do we mean by high performing organization? Well, essentially it means organizations that are accomplishing their mission with greater impact and effect. That's what a high performing organization is. Take the corporate speak out of it. It's all about the mission. Now, the church has the most important mission in the world. Again, pick up the newspaper every single day. There is nothing more important than what's happening in the church. The inauguration just happened 2 days ago. It's obviously very significant and impactful for the whole world and for us in Canada. Nothing's more important than what we're doing. What we're caught up is the most important mission. The average Fortune 500 company lasts about 40 to 50 years. The church has been around for 2,000 years. And our mission actually is the only mission that impacts eternity. So leadership really does matter. All right, the diamond life, as I mentioned very briefly earlier on, this one's about the heart. The diamond life is basically the understanding that God's curriculum for strengthening the leader within you is adversity, it's difficulty, it's suffering. I call this the diamond life. You know, beautiful diamonds and the lead in your pencil have the same root element, carbon. But in the case of diamonds, the atoms themselves are more tightly compacted than in your pencil. And that is what gives them their beauty. So what's the point? Well, to form the bonds that are tight enough to be beautiful requires a particular environment. And diamonds are formed, as we know, deep within the Earth's crust, where natural elements of darkness, extremely high temperatures, and really high pressure exist naturally. So the suffering that the elements go through is what creates their beauty. In other words, no suffering, no diamonds. But when diamonds are harvested from the adverse environment in which they develop, they are beautiful, they are resilient, and they are often given as gifts to others. How quickly do we interpret the difficult elements of our lives as obstacles for growth, when God is actually giving them to us as opportunities for growth? They are the very things that will develop in us resilience and beauty in the eyes of God, and attractiveness to the world, and strength. And that formation leads us to being a gift to be given and poured out for the sake of others. The process of the diamond life is a noble ideal to embrace in our leadership. Like diamonds, we leaders are called to be beautifully formed by God, to be strong and resilient, and to give ourselves away as gifts to others. So that's the first part of the presentation here, is the 5 laws of leadership. There they are in summary form again. These are like the laws of gravity. We can try and live outside of them, but that's not going to end very well. So let's jump into something more practical for the parish context, leadership in the parish context. And to do this, we're going to just unpack 3 simple questions. Why is a healthy leadership team important in a parish? What does a healthy leadership team look like? And how can pastoral leaders begin to develop a healthy leadership team? So first question is, why is a healthy leadership team important in a parish? And there's really 3 key words here, right? There's team, health, and leadership. So the first thing, team. Team is important because one leader is too small a number when you consider the importance of our mission, right? The consequences of fulfilling our mission or not are so critical for all of eternity that one leader is not enough. Not only do we need a team of leaders, we need a movement of leaders, multiplying leaders everywhere we go. It has to be a part and parcel of our methodology to grow a movement of leaders for the sake of our mission. The second is health. Health is important because healthy things grow, right? Healthy things grow. Healthy teams increase their effectiveness and they bear more fruit over time. Our mission is so important that we have to be healthy. And then the third third dimension is leadership. You know, it's a leadership team. Now, it's an important distinction. The ideal here is not to lead a team. It's not to have a pastor leading a team. The ideal is to lead from a team. And we're going to unpack that. So first of all, what exactly is a leadership team? A leadership team is a few strong leaders. I would suggest no more than 5. And these leaders can be paid staff or volunteers or a combination of the 2. It's a small group of leaders that gather around a pastor to help him make strategic and tactical decisions, and then mobilize people to execute those decisions for greater impact. That's it. That's really what a leadership team is all about. It's a very important group, but a leadership team is even more than that. A leadership team represents a significant shift in the way we do church. And the shift in the way we do church is necessary because the world in which we are church is so drastically different than it was when the model that we're currently living in, that's kind of outdated, was introduced. And we cannot hang on to the illusion that the world hasn't changed, right? And our relationship with the world hasn't changed. You know, our relationship with the world, we can't have a relationship with the world as we want the world to be, or as we think it was decades ago, right? We all know this to be true. The church, and we know this in different places around the world more than others, but the church is no longer considered the trusted lighthouse for society that it once was. Father James Mallon has a kind of pithy statement here. He says, we're trying to do ministry like we live in Jerusalem, but we actually live in Babylon, right? That's a pithy summary of it. But this is the world in which we live. This is the world in which our parishes are called to become outposts of missionary dynamism. We no longer live in the age of Christendom. We live in a new apostolic age. And so the new evangelization that the church has been calling us to do and embrace for the last 40 years needs a new model of leadership. And so I would summarize the shift in leadership with two phrases. And this, by the way, is an example of how we could deep dive on this for like a month. Okay, we've got about 6 minutes to cover this part. But the first is that we need to stop confusing authority, leadership, and competence. And we need to just understand what those terms are, what they mean in a leadership team, what they mean in a parish context. And we have to stop hoping for participation and start leading for engagement. So let's look at the first one. And I'll begin with a personal example. So as the Archbishop's delegate in Vancouver, there's 4 floors in our pastoral center. I oversee all the staff on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And as a delegate, I have the formal authority, if you will, given to me by the Archbishop, to walk into any meeting on the 2nd and 3rd floor, to speak out some orders, and to expect it to be done. Now, would that be a smart thing for me as a leader to do? No, that would be quite dumb, actually. It would be not very smart at all as a leader to just begin to engage. But there's a reason for it. If I did that, I would be guilty of confusing authority and competence. Okay? Most senior organizational leaders, including myself, many in the corporate world, many in the academic world, and many in the pastoral world, have authority over areas in which we do not have competence, or we have minimal competence. And there's really 2 negative results that happen when leaders confuse authority and competence. The first is that I, as a leader, will give the wrong direction or make the wrong decision because I lack the experience, expertise, and competence in that area. Now, this isn't malicious. It's just that I have blind spots. What's a blind spot? And we all have them. There's 211 people on this call. There are 211 people that have blind spots. We all have them. But a blind spot is simply something that you think you do well, think you know well, and you actually don't. Now, in the case of leaders, if you think you know something well and you begin to make decisions and strategic decisions or direction, and maybe nobody has the courage to tell you, you can go on a long time in a blind spot, and it's not helping. So we need to stop confusing authority and competence. The second negative result when leaders confuse authority and competence is that they disempower people. They're disempowered and often become disengaged because your people know what needs to happen. They know how it needs to happen, but we're not giving them permission to let it happen. So the best leaders, I'll summarize it like this. The best leaders have enough smarts to hire or place a volunteer, pick the right people to do the job, and then enough humility to leave them alone while they get it done. Now, in our parish context, I want to make a very important clarification here, because this does not take away any of the formal canonical authority of a pastor. Okay? Bishops possess the fullness of the priesthood of Christ, and they ordain priests and they mandate pastors as point leaders in a parish context. The church is a hierarchy. It's designed that way by Jesus himself. Bishops have authority to mandate priests to become pastors. Bishops do not mandate senior leadership teams or leadership teams in a parish. But remember, authority and leadership, again, are not the same thing. So the opportunity there is for pastoral leaders to delegate some of their authority to trusted lay people capable of exercising that authority well, so that they can influence, which is their role, is to influence, not to have the authority, but to influence. So as we consider the influencing aspect of leaders, pastors should learn to delegate to the members of their senior leadership team and others. And in that way, it's not unlike that candle metaphor. You know, we've heard this many times, but you know, a candle does not lose any of its brilliance and light. by lighting another candle, right? And it's the same idea. So let's look at the second phrase. Oops, I want to back up. The second phrase, to stop leading for participation and to start, where am I going? Oh, go back. Sorry, guys, there it is. And I want to talk a little bit about this one because this brings up the term disengagement. We need to lead for disengagement, not just hope for participation. So the background of this is that, you know, many of you know that the Gallup organization conducted the mother of all employee engagement surveys, 17 million surveys, decades-long research, and the data confirm what most managers feel: engagement down. It's way. Consider the following analogy. Okay, 10 employees on a boat. There are 3 of them paddling together, trying to move things forward, trying to make progress. There's 5 that are not paddling at all in the middle. They're just kind of coasting. And then you have 2 at the back that are actually actively trying to stop or even capsize the boat. Now, the reality is, according to Gallup, this is the average workforce. This is the average workplace. 3 out of 10 are actively engaged, 5 are coasting, 2 are actively disengaged, actually moving against the organization. Now, what's really interesting about this, it's estimated, by the way, in the corporate world, that's about $450 billion lost productivity because of disengagement. And that number is actually not moving. In all of the efforts that we've tried to do with engagement, the needle is not moved. But after Gallup released this information, a funny thing happened, an interesting thing happened. And that is that a lot of the engagement with the research and a lot of the organizations that were coming to Gallup saying, will help us develop our own measures and help us track increasing engagement, help us to increase engagement, were churches. And so Gallup instituted an actual church division. And maybe some of your parishes have done this, but one of the tools that they created is called ME25, so Membership Engagement 25. And it's based on a survey that has 25 questions to test parishioner engagement in our churches. And they're finding the same results. That, and this is no surprise to us, but the majority of people are disengaged from the community. The majority of people are disengaged personally from the mission of the church. So disengagement, you can think of it as simply this. Disengagement is the gap between the level of discretionary effort we need for our mission and the level of discretionary effort actually being brought by our people. And we need to close that gap. We desperately need to close this gap. Engagement, like everything else, rises and falls on leadership. The biggest factor influencing employee engagement is the relationship of people with their supervisor. And the same is true in any environment. This is why leadership matters so much. Jim Clifton, who's the CEO of Gallup, actually said the most important decision you will ever make in your job is naming your leaders. And I would say that is true in the parish context as well. And sometimes we're naming leaders, often we're naming leaders that are volunteers, and that's fine. But you know, the quality of those leaders is critical. We need to populate our parish structures and ministries with leaders that can enhance engagement. So what does it mean to lead for engagement? Very briefly, it means to inspire people in their mind, heart, soul, and strength. Again, this is where we would deep dive, but we're just going to stay on the surface. Okay. Inspire people's hearts. Fundamentally, people don't care how much you know or how much you can do until they know how much you can care, how much you care. Inspire the mind. Leading for engagement means having a clear and compelling vision that allows people to see that your parish is an exciting place to be. Inspiring the soul. God has infused in every single human heart, every person that you lock eyes with. He has infused in their heart a desire to find meaning. And leading for engagement always starts with why, to get clear on why we're doing what we're doing. Inspire their strength. So we are created, hardwired by God to desire meaning, but we're also desire to leave a legacy. And leading for engagement means finding meaningful ministry that is uniquely tailored to the passions and gifts of our people. And if our senior leaders can inspire your people's heart, soul, mind, and strength, and if they can multiply leaders who do the same and build a multiplying movement of leaders, then engagement will go up and our parishes will be renewed. So let's look at what does a healthy leadership team look like. Again, guys, we're covering the surface here, no deep dives, but we're going to cover it all. And there's 7 qualities. We're going to go through them pretty quick. So the first one is that healthy teams trust each other. Healthy teams trust each other. Trust is the one thing that changes everything. When trust is high, communication is easy. You'll notice this in relationships. When you think about the relationships that you have, when trust is high, communication is easy. Even if I make a mistake in my speech, because you trust me, trust fills in the gap and you still understand my meaning. But if trust is low, if there's been betrayal or if suspicion is reigning in a relationship, then I might be very calculated in what I say. I might be very precise with my listening to me and hear what you say, but what do you really mean? That is the opposite of trust. That is suspicion. And when you think about that situation, what I just described of how suspicion can come in, and bring that into every conversation, into every meeting, every decision, you see how important trust is for the free flowing of meaning through conversation. Trust is to teamwork what the foundation is to your home. In other words, the impact of your leadership team will never grow beyond the foundation of trust on which it's built. Healthy teams identify as a team. The reality is most teams are not real teams. They're working groups. And a working group is simply an association of individuals that report to the same boss. And reporting to the same boss does not make you a team. It just means you report to the same boss. What makes you a team is simply a shared win. A shared win, something you're all trying to accomplish together that you could not accomplish on your own. Healthy teams never define success as the sum of their parts. That's a working group. What makes you a team is a sense of interdependency. What makes you a team is collective results. So collaboration is the essence of teamwork. Healthy teams embrace shared values. Shared values basically communicate 3 things. First, they articulate the uniqueness of your mission. Second, they describe what excellence looks like in your context. And third, they clarify how people are treated in the organization. So when you have clear shared values, those values are like glue. They hold a team together. They're like a compass in that they give your team direction. They're like a ruler in that they serve as a measuring stick. And shared values are like a magnet in that they attract the right people. Healthy teams stay on mission. A clear and compelling mission empowers the team to stay on track. A clear and compelling mission helps a team discern between good, better, and best, because in the parish context, with all the limited resources that we have as a reality, we cannot become distracted, right? The deep burning yes that you have to stay on mission is what will now enable you to say no to a bunch of distracting things. And ministry and church teams are not immune from mission creep. In fact, I would say mission or teams in parish context are more vulnerable to mission creep than other environments, because you all have such big hearts. You see a problem, you want to solve it. You see a hurting situation and you want to come with some healing. And so we can easily get off track, but healthy teams stay on mission. Healthy teams also have very clear sets of roles and responsibilities. Roles are who you are within an organization. I'm a pastor, I'm an assistant pastor, I'm a pastoral associate, I'm the secretary. The responsibilities define what you do, what is expected of you and from you. So healthy teams focus on delegating responsibilities to people's sweet spot. And a sweet spot is simply this reality within you that you have certain passions, you have certain gifts. And then if the parish has a need or an opportunity that aligns perfectly with your passion and gift, that's a sweet spot. And it makes management easy because you just lose people and let them go to do amazing things. In our project teams, for example, we will often assign people to project teams based on what the project needs. If they need strategic, those who have strategic giftings will be brought onto the team. If they need hospitality, those within our teams that have hospitality will be brought into those teams so that people can be comfortable in who they are. contain a mix of personalities and strengths and gifts. So different positions on different sports teams and various instruments in the orchestra, we know, produce a positive chemistry because of the mix. In healthy teams, unique personalities are welcomed. They're appreciated. Differences are seen as complementary, not contradictory. Meetings are fun because they generate all kinds of ideological conflict because people come at it from different perspectives. Everyone shares their hearts because they feel free and safe to do so. There's a healthy blend. The last one is that healthy teams have a willingness and an ability to adapt and change. You know, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, but principles never do. Healthy teams are more committed to their method. Healthy teams are never more committed to their method than to their mission. The mission never changes, but how the mission is executed must change because we base that on the environment around us. If any organization should be passionate about becoming great through innovation, it is the church. I believe innovation should be discussed as often and as passionately by pastoral councils in parishes as it is by executive teams in boardrooms. You know, business innovation, it's a familiar concept, is all about gaining market share. And of course, the church isn't interested in market share, but we are interested and concerned about other metrics. For example, St. John Paul II said that the number of those who do not know Christ and do not belong to his church is constantly on the increase. Since the Second Vatican Council 50 years ago, the number has doubled, and our parishes and dioceses confirm this. So if data drives innovation, this number, this trend, should be driving all kinds of innovation within the church. And innovation really begins by asking some hard questions. In other words, or here's one question, is our parishes inward looking or outward looking? Are we focused on the ones we're trying to keep or the ones we're trying to reach? And you can easily discern that by looking at your budget, your calendar of activities, and your prayers. Where's the money going? What is populating our calendars of events? And what are we praying for? Insider-focused churches rarely think about innovation. They prefer the way things were or the way things are to the way things could be and should be. Outward-focused churches are always looking to innovate, always trying to find new ways to interact with people that are not caught up in their parish. New ideas build on other new ideas, and a zeal for souls fuels the entire effort. The church is missionary by nature, but when we forget this and the church begins to look inward, we actually become not only ineffective, but in a certain sense sick, because we're operating in a way that we are not created to operate. We are missionary by nature. You know, there's a term called relevance, and relevance in some circles within the church has a bad taste, leaves a bad taste in people's mouths because they're looking at it through a theological lens. When people say relevance, sometimes they're interpreting it that the church needs to change its teaching, its doctrine. Of course, that's not true. Relevance is not a theological term. It's a methodology term, right? Our methods must change based on the changing environment in which we are church. Absolute truth never goes out of style, but methods, strategies, and expressions of mission have to change with the culture. Healthy teams never say, we've always done it this way. Third question, we'll be wrapping up in about 3 minutes. I'm going to cover this quick, is how can pastoral leaders build a healthy leadership team? And, you know, as I sat down to think about this one, I was tempted to just kind of go over the 7 qualities that I just finished and talk specifically about what can you do to build these 7 areas. But I think to be helpful, the question is, where do we start? Like that 7 qualities might be the second phase. So really, where do we actually start? And we start in all of us and our leaders' hearts, really. And the first thing that we have to do as leaders is we got to be honest with ourselves about our holy discontent. We have to really be honest about the gap between what we are now and what we want to be. And let that holy discontent animate our conversations with people. You know, as you consider the gap between what is and what you know and want and desire the parish environment to be, get clear about what the differences are and start talking about it openly, but talk about it in a way that's full of hope. because you can notice the gap between what you are currently and what you want to be, and focus on, you know, where we are, and, you know, lose hope and kind of be discouraged in that. Or we can just set our vision on what we want to be and just know that this is our starting point, but we're going there, and start talking to people. Second thing is, we really have to recruit the very best leaders possible. And I know what it's like as pastors and pastoral leaders, that, you know, we don't want to ask people because they're busy. The best people are the busiest people, right? And what we have to put in front of them is not a favor that we're asking them, but an incredible mission that we're inviting them to. And we have to recruit the strongest leaders possible, people that are people of influence, people that have, you know, magnanimous character, people that have zeal, people that are teachable, people that are committed to the mission of the church. And another practical thing you can do right after today is really set a deadline. When are you going to have your leadership team in place? If you don't have one now, set a date and start moving towards having that team of 4 or 5 people come alongside and be a partner with you. You do not have to have everything figured out. In fact, it's better if you bring people on a leadership team and together figure everything out, because people that are involved in developing something will be more committed to its execution moving forward. So, surface level, I know we've covered a lot of ground. I think I'm a few minutes over. My apologies, Martina, but we're going to move into, I think, small group team time, but that will be, I think, explained by someone other than me.
Oh, wow. I had the pleasure of actually seeing what you were going to present in advance, but hearing you speak brings it to a whole other dimension, Brett. So thank you very much. And I thought I'd maybe be able to take away a couple of points and just say them to people, but I think people's hearts have definitely been moved today. And hopefully that will be the vehicle for some of the transformation that we're dreaming about in this diocese, and that has already started in certain places. So leadership is an issue of the heart, power, influence with people rather than over people. Change is the permanent landscape of leadership. I mean, there's so much, but I absolutely loved the last slide where you talked about holy discontent. You know, I have a dream. What is that dream that we all have individually and collectively for our parish communities, for our diocese? How can we identify those gaps, and how can we set that vision? We do have great people. Let's invite them to that mission and connect with their hearts, and let's move them forward, and let's set a date for what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I feel you've lit a fire even further under me. So I think this is fantastic. Okay, so there you have a summary of that wonderful presentation by Brett. And just to let you know that we will send you through, because Brett has provided us with a PDF of this document, and we will send that through and make it available to everyone. I hope you had some very good sharing in your groups, and thank you for all the questions that are coming in now. I would like to take the first question that came out of the big group that we had, and that was to talk about one vision for a parish where you've got a parish that has a lot of different ministries doing fantastic work, but there's no overarching vision, and the fear that that creates division. I hadn't ever heard that before. It was very clever. So Brett, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first thing, honestly, that I'd want to say, and Father Mike, I heard his comments in this, is that renewal is hard work. And I would not want to elevate an expectation that this is going to be easy, or that it can be done by next Friday at noon. You know, we have to have a very realistic understanding of how hard it is to move things. And it's really difficult for me to make general comments, but I will. I'll do the best I can. General comments to very specific situations, right? Because every parish represented here is on a different, in a different phase of renewal. But the basic principle is that, you know, there does have to be one vision. There's going to be multiple people that are expressing different ministries, And if they can communicate and articulate how their ministry aligns to that vision, then they're on track. If they struggle to not be able to articulate themselves how their ministry fits into the one singular vision, if you will, then that's where the opportunity for division exists. So, and this is where it's funny, because I'll pick up on this because I saw something in the comments about the Good Samaritan, and how it was brilliant, because someone said, I'm glad that the Good Samaritan was distracted by the person, needing help on the side of the road. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's funny. That's a neat insight. But really, it actually shows what it's like to have clarity of your vision. Because when you're clear in your vision, you can easily distinguish what are the things that are opportunities for us to embrace and go for, and what are those things that will take us off. So he was simply manifesting his clarity of vision, that he is there to support and help people in need. And then he threw resources at it. He stayed with it. He served and supported because he had clarity. So when we can know how my ministry, how my day-to-day activity is aligned to the vision, then there's clarity. So I think that's all I can say for that one right now.
Very good, because some of these require really in-depth work. Another question that struck me, and I know it's been asked a good few times, and that is, what happens if the pastor is not on the same page?
Yeah. I mean, that is a, I mean, let's face it, there's parishes all over the place. And the question is, how can we help the pastor see? And you know what? Pastors have their own needs, their own burdens. And we then have to look at, how am I going to influence a leader? Well, I'm going to support that leader in a way that I can to build the relationship. And over time, that building relationship and supporting through my own service, because how do you establish influence? Through service. So you serve. It's not about sending an email or having one conversation. You don't influence anybody like that, including pastors. You influence people through service, through love, through heroic sacrifice, and working with them and building bridges. And so that's going to be a longer term vision. But I mean, ultimately, the pastor has to be behind. He's the point person. He's mandated by the bishop. We can't avoid this. We can't go around. That does not work over the long haul. But how can we help our pastor to be encouraged? I mean, I talk to pastors and bishops all the time, on the phone, Zoom calls and all that. There is a level of discouragement that our pastors share that has to be labeled. And we have to love them. We have to operate in such a way that we are not seen as another burden, but as a source of support and help and courage. And as we build relationship over time, we can begin to collaborate together.
Okay, so another one, and it's absolutely huge. What are the practical ways to get the not engaged people to become engaged? How do we mobilize them?
Yeah, and again, this is where everything comes down to relationship. Leadership is relationship. It's not, you don't lead people by sending emails or making an announcement. We're in this for the long haul, and relationship takes time. And this is why what I'm proposing is that you have a leadership team, but there has to be a movement of leaders, a movement of influencers who, I mean, Pope Francis talks about the periphery, right? But how do we close the gap on the periphery? So let's say the periphery are those people that are disengaged, those people that are out there. The periphery is actually proximate to us through relationships. If we think it's all those people that never come to church and all that, then we're going to think, well, I sent an email and maybe I'll invite them to an event. It is done through relationships. The periphery is closed in distance by the relationships that we have. So you got to think multiplying leaders that extend out into the periphery, even the peripheries of our parish.
And so the other part of that is then, what do you do in a parish that's happy and comfortable with where they're at? You know, they don't want any change at all. How do you manage that so that you can get that shift in culture?
Right. There's no parishes like that in Montreal, I'm sure.
Oh, they're telling you in the chat that there are.
I'm sure they are. Yeah, I mean, this is where, I mean, and it's an important piece that the pastor does have to speak into this, and maybe he can assign this to somebody who has maybe the competence and the skill area in that. But we do have to create a bit of a burning platform. We have to create an unease, a distaste for where we are right now. You remember the slide I showed with moving from here to there? That is the simplest understanding of what has to happen. We need to move our parish from here to there. And one of the ways that there's two ways, there's two sides of the same coin. We have to speak to the unsatisfactory current reality that we have, right? Most Catholics are not practicing their faith. Most Catholics are not engaged with the mission of the church. The impact of, marriage and family is impacting Catholic families as much as anybody else. We need to speak clearly and define current reality for what it is, and then speak with hope to something that can be. And those two, like I said, they're two sides of the same coin. We have to create this understanding that this is not as good as it gets. It needs to be better. And then begin to speak clearly what that vision is and move people towards that.
Now, Brett, there are people who are really concerned about what this pandemic is doing, right? We see churches that are not opening. We're particularly in Quebec, 1 minute we can have 25 people, another minute we can only have 10. How do we process through all these wonderful suggestions when the pandemic is there, when, there's an automatic block from people? No, you can't do that. You need to,
Yeah, in the pandemic, I mean, let's face it, there's major, significant negative dimension to this. But as leaders, the most important question we have to ask ourselves always, whether it's this pandemic crisis or another crisis, is a positive, fundamental way of looking at something. And that is to ask, what does this make possible? Right? What does this make possible? I mentioned the book, Good to Great. And there's a beautiful story and how that book came to be written. Jim Collins actually interviewed James Stockdale, who was the highest ranking military officer in the Hanoi Hilton. He was captured, I think, in 1967, was imprisoned until 1974. He was tortured over 20 times. And Jim Collins asked him, how'd you make it through? And Stockdale just said to him, I knew I'd make it out. And so Collins interpreted that and reflected back to Admiral Stockdale, oh, so you were an optimist. And Stockdale got mad at Jim Collins, said, no, I wasn't an optimist. I was the farthest thing from an optimist. The optimists are the ones who thought we'd get out by Christmas, and we didn't. And then Easter, and we didn't. The optimists are ones who kind of had this illusion of hope. He said, I knew we would get out, but more importantly, what I knew is that I would one day look back at this period of time with gratitude in my heart for the lessons that I extracted from it, and I'd be able to apply those lessons to the rest of my life. We have to stop looking at the pandemic as there's no doubt it's a problem. This is not a false illusion of hope, but seriously, what is this making possible? We have learned technical skills. We have learned how to reach out even to our own parishioners. If we can apply that in a mindset of a missionary church, then we've learned something beautiful. There are lessons that God is teaching his church through the pandemic. And if we learn them, we will look back on this period of time and say, I am grateful for those months that we were in lockdown. I am grateful for these 5 lessons, 3 lessons, whatever it is. And that's the mindset of a leader. That's looking at this adversity and this suffering that we're in right now, understanding that this is the very thing that God is giving us to learn something and to grow and to become something beautiful for him. That mindset, I cannot articulate hope in that way.
Can you just repeat that last little bit, because you faded out there, Brett? You cannot articulate that?
I cannot articulate that enough, how important it is to have that positive mindset toward the pandemic. We've got to deal with all the problems, absolutely. But what are we learning that can carry us and lift us into a greater missionary dynamism?
And that probably speaks to a question that I was going to ask you that came up in the chat around innovation. We have already started to innovate, as we can see, you know, the use of technology, our hybrid ministry here and whatever. And so it really is looking to that going forward. What would you say to people if they're looking to innovate?
Absolutely. And I mentioned, I think in the talk, that the church should be more committed to innovation than any organization in the world. Anything that we can learn how to do to advance the mission, we have the moral obligation of learning those things. So these Zoom calls and all of this technology, this is not a temporary fix to get us through a difficult time. This is changing the way we can do ministry. Obviously, we're not going to replace, you can't replace the Mass, which is an incarnational aspect of our faith, with something on Zoom. We need to be present. We need to receive communion. You need to be in person with people to receive the sacrament of reconciliation. But in terms of our missionary outreach, absolutely, Zoom and all the technology is amazing. And we did a retreat for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. It was the first event that we pivoted and went online. And typically this event would gather around 100 people. It was a small event for catechists. We had over 1,000 people attend through Zoom. And it was a wonderful experience. Now, again, that doesn't replace Mass. That's not at all what we're saying. It can't. It's the incarnational approach. But what we have learned can be applied to the missionary dimension so well. And that's the gift that this time is giving to us.
So there seems to be a good bit of chat on the chat about, you know, who do we worry about? Do we worry about those who are disengaged, who are thinking otherwise, who want to stay as it's always been, who don't want to change? Or do we influence and work on that relationship with the people who are on board already?
Yeah, and it has to be both, obviously. I mean, it's the...
Yes.
Right. I mean, it has to be both. We have to care for people and love people and accompany them and journey with them in deep and profound ways. But what happens is, and this has been the nature of the church, and we saw this in the reading from Acts today, is that it naturally then evolves. You know, our care and concern has to eventually be looking outward, because if we're not, we're just not operating in the spirit of Jesus. You know, it's always to multiply and for greater impact of it. So it ultimately has to be both. Absolutely. We can't forget people that are in charge of our care. Obviously we need to care for them, but one of the ways that we care for people is by inviting them into the mission, because otherwise, if we just leave them as what some people call spiritual consumers, we're not actually loving them, because they need to experience the missionary dimension. And that might be more on the social gospel side, that might be more explicitly evangelization with the kerygma, but ultimately we need to get out of ourselves, because we are made as human beings. We are hardwired for self-gift, and we will just be frustrated in our human experiences. All we're concerned about is consuming more spiritual content, more spiritual experience, you know, all those things. So, you know, this is why the Dead Sea, and I don't even know if this is true, but I've heard it said that the Dead Sea is dead because there's something coming in, but nothing going out. Right. And so the church has to think that way. Again, I don't know if that's actually true, but I've heard it said.
That's very good analogy, though. You've used a few of those today. Thank you very much, Brett. Really and truly, I'm delighted. But you can see from the chat that a lot of other people are delighted too. I just say that we've gone over time, and if anybody wants to leave, please feel free to do so. I'm going to ask Bishop Alain now to acknowledge Brett, and also to talk about the event on the 3rd of February, because we're going to continue this leadership discussion. Thank you so much, Brett.
Thank you, Martina, and thank you, Brett, for this breathtaking conference and chat. One thing I'd say first and foremost is I really needed this. So, I acknowledge that we need it at the diocesan level, and some questions have been asked about how can we transform ourselves also, and how do we build, how do we do team building at the diocesan level? So it's been so helpful, challenging, lots of questions. We'll have to reflect on this. It's not a one-shot deal. It's not, you know, it's not the flavor of the month. It's about transformation, and we're deeply committed to missionary transformation in the church. So thank you so much, Brett, for your time, for your talent, the treasure you brought us this morning. or this early morning for you, I guess. I want to say thank you to the team that built this incredible meeting. And this is, for me, okay, from my perspective, when I look at the screens, and I must say the screens because there are 7 or 8 screens in front of me right now, I see our church and I see people becoming someone for one another through the differences between linguistic and cultural backgrounds that are no more barriers in our church. And this is something that I really do appreciate, because this is the Church of the Pentecost that we're living right now. And my goodness, thank you so much for doing this and building this this encounter this morning, this meeting. Martina, you know maybe all the people that are involved in this, but I want to thank them all, and I want to thank you all. And I'll figure out a way, but you know yourselves, and we'll say many thanks. But I want to say a special thank you to Isabel, because she's been in the background. She's been working so hard, maybe sweat a bit this morning over the breakout rooms or everything. So thank you, merci, muchas gracias, Isabel. Thank you so much for all you've done. Moving forward, just to give a signal that this is not the last time we're talking about leadership and transformational leadership. I will be posting right now, I hope it will work, some links to register for a chat, a different kind of getting together with Archbishop Paul-André Durocher from Gatineau, and it's in the chat right now for registering for this event coming up on the February 3rd. So maybe, voilà, c'est ça. Ben, parfait. Merci. C'est-tu Cynthia qui a fait ça, là? Cynthia, thank you. So Archbishop Durocher will be addressing us in French, but there will be simultaneous translation in English. And it's his own personal take on transformational leadership from his own experience as parish priest, not only as Archbishop of Gatineau or bishop in Ontario, but also as a parish priest. And he'll be especially addressing 5 skills that, according to him, are essential moving forward in our transformation of church and leadership. So February 3rd, as you have it here, for a chat with Archbishop Durocher. He was with us on the 21st of November and kickstarted all this this endeavor to give some sequence and some intent to our transformation here in Montreal. So if you are from France, from as far as the South Shore of Montreal or even Vancouver, you're all welcome. This is also something that is very enriching. En tout cas, c'est très enrichissant. Sorry, my English is approximate at times. But thank you again, everyone, for your participation, because this has been something that has been done together. Everyone has contributed to the success of this morning. So let us
Thank you. And now you can bless everybody, Father.
Well,
or Bishop.
I'll ask the Lord. Well, yeah, no more titles. I got this. No. Well, I'll ask the Lord to bless you, bless us all, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. I'll take the blessing that we find in Numbers. We're still in the beginning of the year, so this is a New Year's blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.